Good evening. Welcome to the Institute, the Jewish Studies. The name of the course is Practice Makes Perfect, Introduction to Jewish Actions. And this particular class is action versus faith and feeling. You know, when we talk about doctors, we talk about how they practice medicine. A lawyer practices law. When do they begin to actually do anything in those fields? They're always practicing. But I think it's an apt way of putting it, because in our lives, anything that we do, even the things that we do well, it's always a preparation for the next stage, for a better and higher level of achievement. And the same thing is true with Judaism, that the word practice can have these two meanings, the meaning of action and the meaning of preparing for something higher. Before we get into the actual discussion of these three areas, faith, feeling, and action, there's a question that we have from the inside cover. What would you put as the most important ideal of Judaism and why? Now, if I let everyone write an essay to really answer the question definitively, it would probably take us for hours and hours, not weeks and weeks. So I just wanted to get a few ideas, what you have, what you feel is the most important ideal of Judaism, and then we'll see how it ties in with what we're going to be discussing. Yes?
It's advice on thinking.
Okay. Hillel, the famous Talmudic sage, in response to a prospective convert who wanted to study the whole Torah standing on one foot, said, "What is hateful unto you, don't do to others." That's the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. That's perfect answer. In fact, I can't imagine that anything that you'll say will be incorrect. While we do believe that there are some fundamental aspects of Judaism, basically, from different perspectives, there are different ideals that are the most important ideal. So, in one sense, that is the foundation of Judaism. That's one of the ideals. Any other suggestions as to what is the main or the most important ideal of Judaism? Yes? Faith, right? That's a good one. We're soon going to get into that. Anything else? What? Faith. Faith in God would be the most important ideal. Yes? Or heritage, okay. You can't get this question wrong. Yeah. What?
Fighting.
Tzedakah. Yes, absolutely. So you're all right. But nevertheless, we're going to look at it perhaps from a little bit of a different angle, based on a misconception that we see very often expressed by many Jewish people as to Judaism's lack of emphasis on faith. Many people claim that Judaism, unlike other religions, does not put that much of a stress on faith. I'm going to soon explain that there's always a kernel of truth in every myth, and there's a kernel of truth in that one as well. But it is not, at face value, taken very literally, it is absolutely not true. The fact is that faith is the foundation of Judaism. There's a passage in the Talmud, if you look at text number 1, where the prophet Habakkuk, when he came through Ellis Island, but Habakkuk is his Hebrew name, very strange name, unusual name. I've never heard of another person ever called by that name to this day. But Habakkuk took all of Jewish values and he reduced it to one. they give you a little bit of a backdrop. In the Talmud, it refers to the 613 commandments. And the Talmud then explains that various leaders and prophets try to encapsulate those 613 in smaller, fewer numbers to make it easy to relate to. If I tell somebody, I want you to do a few things. Well, how many things do you want me to do? 613. It's going to overwhelm them. So you tell them a number that is more or less palatable and something that people could relate to. You tell them 10, 20. So each generation saw that it was becoming more and more difficult for people to relate to large numbers, so they tried to find a few commandments that could encapsulate the others. They didn't mean to diminish or detract from the others. They just wanted you to have certain things to hold on to. And Habakkuk seemed to be the last in that line of reducers who said we could take all of Judaism and reduce it to one thing, and that is faith. And he, quoting the verse over there in the book of Habakkuk, a righteous man lives by his faith. By the way, Habakkuk, for those who would like to know a little bit more about him, there's not much we know about him, but we do know, we read this in the synagogue just 2 days ago, of the story of Elisha the prophet, who promised this woman a child, who was childless for many years, and when the child died, Elisha was summoned and he brought the child back to life. According to the oral tradition, that child was Habakkuk. So his faith, you could say, was something that he experienced because he went through the actual coming back from the dead. It's something that could make you a believer, even if you hadn't been a believer before. But at any rate, Habakkuk reduced Judaism, and the word reducing is a poor choice of words because he didn't reduce it, but what he did is he demonstrated how all of Judaism is an outgrowth from the faith in God. And the question that arises, could Judaism exist without faith? In other words, there are 613 commandments. Most people do not know what they are even. But even if you knew what all the 613 were, and all of a sudden you were told that Judaism is going to drop one of those 613, this is hypothetical, of course, because we never drop anything. Would that alter Judaism, the character of Judaism? For example, we can't wear a garment that has a mixture of wool and linen in it. If that wouldn't be a commandment, if somehow it would be erased from our consciousness, Judaism would still very much be intact. You wouldn't imagine that Jews have changed. Look what, we can't recognize them. But if you take God out of Judaism, faith out of Judaism, it wouldn't be recognizable. It wouldn't be the same religion. And that's why Maimonides formulated 13 principles of faith. What he meant by those principles, and they all revolve around the existence of God and our relationship with God. What he meant by that is that faith in God and the other auxiliary principles are the foundation of Judaism. The word foundation implies that it's not the structure. You cannot live in a foundation, but it is the foundation without which the structure cannot survive. Faith is the most fundamental part of Judaism. We're not going to go into the 13 principles of faith. We had a course about this in the past. I'm just citing Maimonides' formulation of 13 principles of faith in order to demonstrate how faith is not something that we don't stress, as some people might have thought. It's something that we do stress as the foundation of Judaism. Yes?
The man of the details.
The reason I picked that commandment...
No. What Nestle to pick it? What's the reasoning behind it?
But the reason I picked that commandment is because there is no evident reason for it. There are reasons that were given, rationalizations for it, but it's essentially included in a category of commandments that are dictates. God says, do it, don't ask any questions. I want you to do it. That's a category of commandments. But that's why I picked on that one, because if I told you that God eliminated the one about don't commit murder, you would say, yes, certainly that would alter Judaism, because that's a rational one. But if I tell you one that is not dictated by logic, you'd say, well, it's nice that that's part of Judaism, but if it would be missing, we wouldn't miss it. That's my point. But maybe some other time, after the class, I'll tell you some of the rationalizations for it. But it's essentially just a dictate of God. You know, the truth of the matter is, and this is not really the point I want to make, but I think it's important just to throw this out in parenthetically, that every human being bases their life on faith. Whether they call it faith in God, or they call it faith in science, faith in the decency of humanity, faith in whatever it is that gives credence to everything else that goes beyond that faith. For example, if you walk into this building, you have faith that the person who built it probably followed the codes, and the building will not collapse just because there was some nice heavy winds outside. You have faith. You don't know that for a fact, but it's based on faith. You go fly in a plane because we have faith in the pilot's ability to fly that plane. A scientist has faith in the scientific approach, and it goes even beyond that. I could just share this little anecdote. A colleague of mine was once arguing with an atheist who explained everything scientifically, and he said, well, how do you explain the existence of the first, whatever it is that had the Big Bang? How do you explain that? That is not something that scientists could explain. And he said, I believe that someday science will come along with an explanation for the beginning, the genesis of existence. So my colleague says, well, what difference is there between me and you? You have faith that science will someday find an answer to the question, and I have faith that God did it. So you're also a man of faith. Don't claim that you're based on everything is logic. It's not true. Everyone has faith. It's just the question is, what do you use your faith for, and how it affects your life? And that's where we come into the next point, which is a very crucial thing. There is a built-in weakness with faith. All you have to do is look around at the number of people today, and this has been true since the beginning of time, who use faith to do the most horrific things. People who will murder in the name of their faith. So just because you have faith doesn't guarantee that you will be a decent, moral, ethical person. There's something about faith that seems to be deficient. The truth of the matter is, it's not the deficiency of the faith, it's the deficiency of their own character, because they will use faith to fit their own agenda. The atheist, who is a horrible person, will use the absence of faith to buttress their own desires. Because if they say, well, why can't I steal? There is no God, there is no system of ethics, I can do whatever I want. So what are they doing? They're using their atheism as a tool to justify their unethical behavior, and the believer in God uses his belief in God to support his unethical behavior. So you can take faith and twist it around. But that points to a certain weakness of faith. But there's even a more stronger challenge to faith. If you look at the text number 3, Talmud says, even a burglar tunneling under the walls of a home has faith and calls upon God to help him. This sounds like a hypothetical situation. My son is a chaplain in a prison, and one of the inmates told him that he was picking a lock, breaking into someone's home, and the lock wasn't going. It wasn't, he couldn't get in. So he turns to God and he says, God, please help me. I have to get in. And no sooner does he finish his prayer, the lock opens and he commits the crime. Of course, he was caught. So how do you explain that contradiction. Here you're talking about someone who has faith. It's not someone who is perverting his faith. He has real, genuine faith in God. He's not using his faith to cover up something. He really believes in God. How do I know he believes in God and he's not faking? Who is he trying to impress? He's a thief, remember. He's not doing this in public. He's trying not to be detected by anyone. So this is a real, sincere prayer that he believes in God sincerely and says, God, please help me. Do what? Commit a crime. So there's a certain disconnect between faith and behavior. How does one explain that? In Hasidic literature, it explains that a human being is made up of many different layers of their personality. Is not a mixture of different drives and different influences, but we're layered, we're stratified. We have on the surface, on the periphery, you have faith. If you want, you could use the analogy that it's deep down in the core of your being. But then there's another level, your mind, your intellect. Then you have your feelings. Very often, the two layers do not connect. You can have genuine, profound faith and yet not act in accordance with that faith. A simple example that we see in everyday life, there are people who know, it's more than faith, they know it scientifically that smoking is bad for your health, and they will smoke. So what's going on over here? They know that it's bad for them, but that part of your personality, your understanding, or even your faith doesn't necessarily connect with your emotions or with your behaviors. So what is our challenge? Our challenge is to get the faith connected to the rest of our personality. But faith in and of itself cannot guarantee proper behavior. Moses is sometimes referred to in Aramaic as Raya Mehemna, the faithful shepherd. And one other translation of it is not the faithful shepherd to mean a reliable leader, but a shepherd of faith. What does it mean, a shepherd of faith? Not that he gives people faith. Moses didn't give them faith, but he nurtured their faith, trying to get their faith to permeate their personality. So on one hand, Judaism posits that faith is the most fundamental part of our Judaism. But it's not more than a foundation, not less and not more. And the foundation in and of itself cannot guarantee the ideals of Judaism being implemented. So then we have to get to the level of feelings. How important are our feelings? Very important. If you look at text 4a, and everyone was familiar with this, this verse, V'ahavta, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your means, with all your might. And the next verse is the parallel to love is fear or reverence. Sometimes we translate the word tira as fear only because in English there are different words for different emotions. In Hebrew you could use one word for many emotions. The word yira or tira encompasses a whole wide range of emotions, ranging from outright fear, trepidation, to respect, shame, reverence, awe. They're all contained within that word. These are emotions. And the Torah commands us to have these emotions. And the text 4c makes it even more clear. And now Moses says to the Jewish people, before they're ready to enter into the promised land, he's giving them his last will and testament. Now, O Israel, what does the Lord your God demand of you? Only to fear the Lord. Again, the word fear is the limited translation. It means much more than fear. To walk in all his ways, to love him with all your heart. These are all emotions. And in text number 5, again, we find that this is a verse that's repeated several times in the Torah. Serve God with all your heart. Heart here doesn't doesn't mean the physical organ of the heart, it means your emotions. So we know that emotion, feelings are extremely important in Judaism. It's hard to imagine Judaism without the ideas of love and reverence for God. But in spite of all that has been said about faith and about emotions in Judaism, look in text number 6, where our sages in Ethics of the Fathers make a very powerful statement, a very brief statement, very, very succinct. Hamasehu ha'ikar. The deed is the essential thing. After everything else that has been said about the importance of faith and the importance of feelings, what is the most essential thing? It's the deed. Now here we're going to raise some very strong questions. When we say that the essential thing is the deed, I'll give you some examples of how that could sound almost ridiculous. Take, for example, this is the lesser of the two examples. Charity, tzedakah, is a mitzvah to give to those who don't have. So here's a person who's walking down the street, $10 bill falls out of your pocket. You don't even know that you lost the $10 bill. Poor man comes along, sees the $10, picks it up, doesn't know who it belongs to. He can't return it. There's no one to return it to. And buys himself a sandwich and has something to eat that day. Otherwise, he would go starving. Is that tzedakah? You don't even know that you gave it. You wouldn't think it is, but it is. The Talmud says that you fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah. And when God is tallying all your good deeds on Rosh Hashanah or the next world, this will be in that list of good deeds that are attributed to you. You get the full credit for it because you helped that poor person. Was there any feeling involved? No feelings. You don't even know that you lost it. And maybe when you discover that you lost the $10, you say, "Oy, I'm so upset." So you're even upset about it. And yet you have a mitzvah. Now that I could explain a little bit more easily than the next example. Because here you could say, what is the purpose of tzedakah? For me to feel good? For me to give so I could feel good? Or it's for me to help someone who's in need? My feelings are irrelevant. When you deal with a mitzvah that involves helping another individual, the focus has to be exclusively on that individual. Sometimes people forget about why they're doing that mitzvah for the other, and they're thinking about what honor they will get, what credit they will get. You know, when we do many of the mitzvahs, there's a blessing that we recite before performing a mitzvah. That's a way of spiritually preparing ourselves for the mitzvah. Before you give tzedakah, you don't recite any blessings or prayers. Why not? One of the reasons, there are many reasons given. One of them is the poor guy is starving. And meanwhile, you're getting all this inspiration and saying the blessing. The poor guy is going to drop dead. By the time you get around to finish your blessing, the guy might not be around. Now, of course, that's an exaggeration, but the point is that it's not about your spirituality. Your giving at tzedakah is about the needs of the recipient, not about your, credits. Yes, you get a lot of credit for the mitzvah. It does enhance your spiritual composition. You become a better person. Every time you give tzedakah, you become a more kind person, a more refined person. It has a tremendous effect on you, but that is irrelevant. If I had a choice to do one mitzvah of tzedakah to help one person and lose all my inspiration, lose all my spiritual feelings, or have all these spiritual feelings and not do the tzedakah, you would choose the former. Do the mitzvah and don't get any credit for it. There's a story that just came to mind. I remember hearing from my father when there was a famous Hasidic master. His name was Zusha. He was a very poor man, and he was a student of the leader of the Hasidic movement known as the Maggid of Mizrich. And he comes to his master, to his teacher, and the subject of his daughters, they were of marriageable age. In those days, he couldn't marry off your daughter unless he had money to support the dowry and so on and so forth. And he was very poor. So his master opens up his drawer, takes out 200 rubles that people had given him to distribute to charity. He says, here, take this for your daughter so you can marry them off. So he takes the money and he leaves. Then while he's going down the road, he sees there's a big commotion. What happened? A salesman, a person who had traveled around the countryside to sell his wares, had finally returned home, and somehow his wallet disappeared with all the money that he had accumulated. And when he discovered his loss, he fainted. And they tried to revive him. And as soon as they awakened him, he asked, did you find the money? And they said no. He would just fall again into this unconscious state, and his life was in danger. So Zusha asks, well, how much money did he say he lost? 200 rubles. So Zusha says, I found it. Of course, he didn't find it, but he had 200 rubles in his pocket. And he gives him 190 rubles. And they revive this person. And the man says, oh, thank you so much. And he looks at it, 190. There was 200, not 190. And Zusha says, no, I only found 190. And the man says, you're a thief. Give me back my 10 rubles. And of course, there's a big commotion, and the police come, and they're escorting Zusha to jail. So the Maggid, his master, is looking out the window, and he sees this big commotion. And who does he see in the center of it all? His disciple, Zusha. And the police are arresting him. So he runs out, and he asks them what's going on. And they tell him that he stole 10 rubles. He takes out 10 rubles from his pocket and gives it and ransoms his disciple. And he brings it back into his study. He says, tell me, Zusha, I know you gave that man the money that I gave you for your own benefit, for your own needs. I know you did that. I know. But why couldn't you give the full 200? You can't do much with 10 rubles. He said, you know what? If I would have given this 200, people would have discovered that it wasn't my money. It wasn't his money. It was my money. And people would say, look, what a righteous and saintly man this Zusha is. Because you know what? I did a mitzvah, and in the eyes of everyone else, I'm a common thief. That's the ideal mitzvah. So the ideal mitzvah is to help the person, not to get credit for it. So that we can understand that somewhat, yes.
How would you
charity to an organization that ends up paying the people who are on the phone and all kinds of, maybe it's not a worthy charity as such?
Okay, that's a good question. Some people give tzedakah, and unfortunately, the causes that they give to turn out not to be worthy causes. I can't go give you the guidelines how much money the office could take for. There's no law that says that the organization can't spend money to pay the workers. But that's part of your research. You have to find out. That's your challenge, to find out whether it's a worthy cause or not. If they tell you they're giving 95% to the office and 5% goes to the cause, it's not charity, but it's probably not the highest priority. Shouldn't be the highest priority. Yes?
I thought the highest form of charity was that which is given in secret.
Well, there are many different levels of charity, and the reason why that's actually not the highest. The highest is when you don't even give charity. You help the person get on their own 2 feet. But in terms of when you have to give someone a handout, the highest level is where they don't know where it came from, and you don't know to whom it was given. The main point is, stop looking for the highest level of charity. Try to help as much as you can, even if it's not the highest level of charity. You know, it should always, the focus should not be, when you're looking at the different levels of charity, the focus should always be what's best for the recipient, not what's best for the giver. But now, there's another example which really makes it very hard to understand. There's a mitzvah to eat matzah on Passover. That's why we have a Seder, we eat matzah. It's a biblical commandment. What about a person who says, I don't want to eat matzah? I'm matzahed out from last year, and I can't take another bite of matzah. I know some people like that. I love matzah, but some people can't stand it. I eat matzah all year round. So here this guy doesn't eat matzah, can't stand it, But it's a mitzvah, it's a commandment. So someone goes over to them and stuffs the matzah down their throat. They fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah. Now that sounds really crazy. The person doesn't want to do the mitzvah. And yet, because the matzah did go down their gullet, they digested it, it's part of their body, they fulfill the mitzvah. So how could you call it a mitzvah when there's no feeling? There's no desire. There's not even the minimum amount of feeling, let alone higher levels of devotion. So how do we reconcile that with the importance that Judaism assigns to emotions? In order to explain all of this, we have to talk a little bit about a myth about how God relates to us. And this myth is that God cares about spirituality. God wants us to be spiritual because God is the ultimate spiritual being. That's not true. God is no more spiritual than he is physical. To call God spiritual is to define God in finite terms. Let me just look at it from another angle. My son-in-law had a discussion with this eminent scientist in Florida. He's one of the top people in his field. I forgot his name. And he comes to the conclusion that there must be a God in this world. He says his knowledge of science forces him, compels him to believe in a God, in a creator. But he doesn't believe God really gets involved in the things that happen in this world. God does not lower himself. It's beneath his dignity to meddle in our affairs. Why would God, who is so great, creator of the universe, be interested in what I have to say or what I do or what... It's petty. It would be an insult to say that God is involved in petty things. And the truth is, the ultimate insult is to say that God cannot be involved in petty things. Because to say that God is only interested in big things is to quantify God and say that God relates to big things more than to small things. For example, if I have an infinite number, 1 relative to infinity is nothing. What about a trillion relative to infinity? Is it any more than 1? No. If you say it's more than 1, then you negated the idea of infinity. Then that to which you're comparing it is not infinite. Because if it's infinite, 1 and a trillion are absolutely the same. They're zeros. They do not rate at all. So the whole universe, physical and spiritual phenomena, is a zero in relation to God. Nothing has any value. Not just a speck of dust, like we are in relation to the earth. We're a speck of dust, and the earth in relation to the whole solar system is a speck of dust. In relation to the galaxy, it's a speck of dust. In relation to the clusters of galaxies, in relation to the whole universe. But a speck of dust is also something. Even one subatomic particle is something. We are zero in relation to God, who is the absolute infinite being. So nothing has value except that which God says has value. God could make things have value. Because he is infinite, there is nothing that limits him. There's no reason why he can't enjoy a mitzvah performed by some simple individual. And to say that God only listens or cares about the most spiritual experiences, meditation, the only reason that God does like those things is because they are also a mitzvah. God assigned importance to spirituality as well. But God assigns importance to those things that he chose to assign importance to. Every mitzvah has infinite value. Anything that we do on our own, if we create our own system that is not mandated by God, no matter how profound we think we are, it has zero value. Although, most likely, in most cases, when a person thinks of doing something for God, you'll find that God did, in fact, want you to do those things. But if you could hypothetically devise a religion in which you have ways of serving God that are not mentioned in the Torah, that have no basis in God's communication to us, it has no value, because how could anything have value in relation to an infinite God? So therefore, to say that God only likes or only cares about big mitzvahs, big in the sense that you do it with feeling, with emotion, with depth, and the small mitzvahs are not important, that's a denigration of God. That's by saying that God is so limited that he can only deal with big things. I'll give you an example. It's an imperfect example because there is no perfect example. You have a university professor. The university professor is brilliant. He has graduate students. He talks to them in language that most people would never understand. You don't hear very often of these brilliant Nobel laureates speaking to children in the kindergarten, trying to explain their theories to them. But the President of the United States, you'll find him reading a book to kids in a kindergarten. The President is the most important person in the country, arguably maybe in the world. But it's not beneath his dignity to read a book to a little child. And not a book about profound knowledge, a storybook, a nursery rhyme. The bigger you are, the more you can relate to that which is small and petty. But of course, it's an imperfect analogy because everyone is finite, so therefore everything has some relative relationship with everything else. But God is the ultimate infinite, so God cares about every little gesture on our part if God had ordained that mitzvah and said, this is what makes me feel happy. Those are human attributes. That's a very good question. We don't have language other than the language that comes from our own experiences. And the Torah uses the language of people to describe God's reaction to what we do. So we know that God's pleasure is not human pleasure. We know that God's will is not human will. But because we don't have any language, because it's beyond our comprehension, we use human language, but we mean it's much more than that. It's beyond anything that we could describe. But God says, I care about your actions. God doesn't have to care about if someone would blow up the whole universe, it wouldn't affect God in any way, except to the extent that God wants the universe to exist. But the same God who wants the universe to exist wants me to do a small little mitzvah that seems to be so insignificant. It's not insignificant. It's more valuable than the whole universe. You know, Jews always believed that the earth is the center of the universe, and they came along and they said, no, it's not true, because we're not really the center of the universe. I don't know if that's true or not true. I'm not an astronomer, but it's irrelevant. Center of the universe does not necessarily mean that if you measure the distance from this point to the end of the universe, you'll find it's the same distance as measuring it from this point to the other end. What it means is that we are the focal point of the whole of the cosmos, of the whole of creation. Why? Because we are the only creatures that are capable of doing a mitzvah, capable of choosing to do something that God ordained. Even if there's life on other planets, which the Torah actually does say there is life in other parts of the universe, but there is no one like us, people who are sentient beings, who have free choice, who can make decisions between right and wrong, who know what God's will is because the Torah was given to us. That is exclusively people on earth, or anyone on earth who has traveled to some other part of the universe. Maybe they did in the past. I don't know. I haven't communicated with anyone from another planet. Some people have, but I have. I can't vouch for that. But we are the center of the universe, because what we do, the small little things that we do, because the big things are also small things, have infinite value, because God says, this is what I want. So even if you have no feeling, the act of the mitzvah itself has infinite value. So then why do we need feelings? Why do we need emotions? Why do we need love? Just do the right thing. Well, first of all, that's true. When you wake up in the morning, as many people do, without any desire to get out of bed, without any desire to do anything for anyone, even for yourself, because you're miserable, you're depressed. So you certainly cannot be asked to get your whole heart and soul into doing a mitzvah at that point. But still get up and do the mitzvah. Don't wait until you have the feeling, because if you have the feeling without the mitzvah, that rates as a 0. If I say I really love other human beings, I really care for them, I have such compassion for every human being who is needy, but I can't be bothered now to give them, to help them, but I have this compassion, that's worthless. It's a 0. Compassion without the act that follows is a 0. The act of helping someone without the compassion, you just drag yourself out of bed and you do the right thing, that rates as having infinite value. So then the question is, why do you need the feelings? Why is that important? And the answer is, if you look in 3, there's a quote from the Ari, the great Kabbalist: a mitzvah without feeling is like a body without a soul. Or the Zohar says, Torah without reverence and love for God cannot soar upwards. So these explanations posit that to make the mitzvah complete, you need feelings, you need love, you need passion, you need a sense of reverence and awe for God. But it goes beyond that. And we're going to talk more about this next week, but I just want to start the discussion of this. When God created the world, according to rabbinic teaching, transmitted orally until it was put into writing in the Midrash, he had a plan. He had a purpose with creation. God created the world to have a dwelling for himself in this physical world. To use a metaphor, God wanted to build a palace. He wanted us to build a palace, so that when the palace is completed, he will take up residence in that palace with us as his guests. But he asks us to build that palace. Every mitzvah that you do is like another brick in that structure. Every mitzvah we do, no matter how insignificant it seems, makes that palace closer to completion. After the requisite number of mitzvahs will have been done, accumulating all the good things that we have been doing for thousands of years, that palace will be complete. So no one has to worry about, how can I build a palace for God? I can't do that much. No one is asking anyone to do that much. Everything you do adds another brick. So we have this magnificent palace. It's now complete. And the king is ready to enter into the palace. And it's dark. They forgot to put the lighting in. Everything is there. The most beautiful architecture, the most beautiful design, the interior decorator. The furniture is exquisite. But someone forgot to put the lighting in there. Could the king take residence there? No. The lighting is the love, the passion, the joy, the emotions. Yes, every mitzvah we do, even the most mechanically motivated mitzvah, performed with just perfunctorily, we just do it out of rote. It's a mitzvah nonetheless. Someone stuffs matzah down the throat. It's still, you fulfill the mitzvah. There's another brick. But it's still a dark palace until you put your full host of feelings into that mitzvah. So, and in addition to that, that too is a mitzvah. The Torah commands us to love God. That is also a mitzvah. But it's a different type of a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that illuminates the world. It brings light. It brings soul into the world. So yes, you can build the structure for God, make the world a dwelling place, But until you actually do the mitzvah with feeling, you will not have a radiant structure. And that is not a place that God can feel comfortable dwelling in. So Judaism, the question is asked, what does Judaism want? Does it want faith? Absolutely. It's the foundation of Judaism. Does it want action? That's the ultimate goal. Action is the most important thing. Does it want feelings? Absolutely, because without the feelings, the structure is incomplete. Because you can't take up residence in a building that is dark. So Judaism does not just, as some other religions might say, that faith is the most important thing, and if you have faith, God will save you. Judaism says faith is very important. It's the foundation. But don't wait to do the mitzvah until you have the faith. If someone will say, I'm going to start doing a mitzvah only when I have faith that I have to do the mitzvah, the problem will be is that faith may never come, and the mitzvah they never observed. Yes?
I have to ask this. How is it understood if you push matzah down a person's throat and he strangles and dies?
No, that's not a mitzvah. No one. The Talmud uses extreme examples to illustrate a point. I don't know of any case in history where someone was forced to eat matzah. Someone pushed it, shoved it down their throat. The Talmud is just trying to make a point that the mitzvah is the act, not the intention, not the feeling. But of course, one of the problems with people who quote the Talmud is that you can't quote one page of Talmud without knowing how that is qualified by what it says in another page. Because I could make some very extreme cases for certain things based on one quote. The Talmud doesn't always tell you, well, yes, this quote and this idea, but you have to qualify it. Certainly, we shouldn't be going around stuffing matzah down people's throats and causing them to choke. That's not a great thing. But hypothetically, if someone was forced to eat the matzah, or I'll give you another example where you don't have to stuff it down someone's throat. Someone points a gun at you and says, either eat the matzah or I'll blow your head off. So you have no choice. You eat the matzah under duress. You still fulfill the mitzvah. If someone what? Okay, that's a legitimate question. There are a lot of mitzvahs that some people can't do because of medical reasons. It's not a mitzvah that you have to give your life for. That means or risk your health. I know people who cannot eat different types of grain. Some people eat spelt. I don't know if spelt is acceptable to someone who has celiac disease. Or some people eat oat, matzah. And if they can't eat any of those things, some people are allergic to all grains, they can't eat matzah. God doesn't expect it of them. There's certain things that you have to do, even if it means dying for. Not too many things. If someone tells you to shoot someone, an innocent person, or else you will be killed, you're not supposed to shoot that person. But eating matzah is not in that category. You don't have to die in order to eat matzah or get very sick. But that itself, you see, the Torah itself tells you the parameters of each mitzvah. So yes, you're supposed to eat matzah, but it doesn't mean you eat matzah no matter what.